It was an ordinary Saturday morning, the kind that starts with coffee brewing and the gentle hum of the city outside my window. I had woken up earlier than usual, eager to tackle my day off with a mix of laziness and light productivity. As I sipped my coffee and scrolled through social media, something caught my eye, a picture on my sister's Instagram. At first, I thought it was just another throwback post. There they were, my parents, beaming next to her, standing in front of a turquoise ocean that stretched as far as the eye could see. My dad had his arms slung casually over her shoulder, and my mom was clutching a sun hat, her face tilted up to catch the golden sunlight. The caption read, "Family Adventure in Paradise." Couldn't ask for better company. My stomach sank. I knew that beach. I knew that hotel. I had booked it for them 6 months ago, thinking how much they deserved a break from their everyday grind. I'd used my bonus to pay for it, secretly excited about surprising them. They had thanked me profusely at the time, promising it would be a trip to remember. But nowhere in those plans was my sister supposed to be tagging along. And certainly, nowhere was I supposed to be left behind. The room around me felt too quiet, the stillness amplifying the pounding of my heartbeat. I stared at the photo on the screen, my coffee growing cold in my hand. My first instinct was disbelief. There had to be some misunderstanding. Maybe it wasn't the trip I had planned. Maybe it was an older photo, or they'd planned something spontaneous. But as I read through the comments below the post, my doubts crumbled. Friends and family chimed in with messages like, "Looks like you're all having the best time," and, "So jealous of your trip, wish I was there." My sister replied to each one with cheerful responses, saying things like, "We're loving it here," or, "Best getaway ever." The picture wasn't the only one. As I scrolled further, I saw a collection of posts from the past few days, pictures of my dad trying paddleboarding, my mom lounging in a cabana, and my sister showing off a seafood platter the size of her head. It was undeniably the trip, the one I had planned down to the last detail. I put my phone down, my appetite gone. Questions swirled in my mind like a storm. Why hadn't they told me they were going? Why hadn't they invited me? And most painfully, how could they enjoy a trip I had given them without sparing me a thought? My phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from my sister. I grabbed it, half expecting her to say something, maybe explain this whole mess. But it was just a picture of a tropical drink with a paper umbrella, captioned, "Cheers from Paradise." I turned my phone over and set it face down on the table. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like responding. The hours that followed were a strange blur of emotions. I went from anger to sadness, then back to anger, each feeling sharper than the last. I tried to rationalize their actions, telling myself there must be a reason, a mix-up, an oversight, maybe even a surprise they hadn't revealed yet. But no matter how I spun it, nothing made sense. By the afternoon, my frustration boiled over, and I decided to call them. I reached for my phone, but my thumb hovered over my mom's contact. What would I even say? "Hi, hope you're having fun. By the way, why did you ditch me on a trip I planned for you?" It felt ridiculous, and worse, I dreaded the answers. I set the phone back down and instead grabbed my jacket. I needed fresh air. The city was buzzing with weekend activity, but I barely noticed the world around me. I wandered through the streets, my thoughts drowning out the sounds of cars and chatter. As I walked, the memories of planning the trip surfaced uninvited. I'd been so excited when I first came up with the idea. My parents had been talking for years about visiting somewhere tropical, but they always put it off, too busy, too expensive, too many responsibilities. So, when I got my annual bonus, I knew exactly how to spend it. I'd spent hours researching the best resorts, finding activities they'd love, and making sure every detail was perfect. When I told them about the trip, their reactions had been everything I'd hoped for. My mom had cried, my dad had patted me on the back with pride, and my sister had even said, "Wow, you really outdid yourself this time." So why had I been left behind? I found myself at a small park bench and sat down heavily, staring blankly at a group of kids playing soccer in the distance. My phone buzzed in my pocket, jarring me out of my thoughts. I hesitated before pulling it out, half hoping it was one of them. Instead, it was another social media notification. Against my better judgment, I opened it. It was another post from my sister. This time, it was a video of my parents dancing under fairy lights at the beach, the waves crashing softly in the background. I watched as my dad spun my mom around, her laughter carried by the gentle wind. The caption read, "Making memories we'll never forget." The bitterness hit me like a wave. We'll never forget. I thought. I'm not even there to be part of those memories. I tossed my phone back in my pocket, unable to look at it anymore. That was when it hit me, this wasn't just about the trip. It was the feeling of being excluded, of being sidelined in a family where I had always believed I mattered. The resentment began to build. By the time I got home, the sunlight had started to fade, casting long shadows across my living room. I sank into the couch and stared at the blank wall in front of me, replaying the posts in my mind. Every laugh, every smile, every detail in those pictures felt like a sharp reminder of my absence. The trip was supposed to be my gift to them, a way to show my gratitude for all they had done for me growing up. Now, it felt like a cruel joke. I couldn't take it anymore. I dialed my mom's number, my hands trembling slightly. It rang twice before her familiar voice answered, warm and cheerful. "Hi, sweetheart," she said. In the background, I could hear waves crashing and faint music, the sounds of their idyllic vacation. "Hi, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "How's the trip?" "Oh, it's been wonderful. Your dad and I have been relaxing, and your sister's been keeping us laughing the whole time. We really needed this." There was a pang in her words, a mixture of pride and nonchalance that twisted in my chest. "I'm glad you're enjoying it," I said, pausing to gather my courage. "I didn't realize you were going so soon." There was a moment of silence, just long enough to feel heavy. "Oh, well," she said, her tone suddenly cautious, "your sister mentioned it was a good time for her, and we thought it would be nice to have her along to keep us company." "Right," I said, swallowing the knot forming in my throat. "And no one thought to invite me?" "You know, the person who planned the trip." Her voice softened, almost apologetic. "It wasn't like that, honey. We just thought." "You thought what?" I cut in, unable to stop myself. "That I wouldn't notice. That I wouldn't care. I spent weeks planning this for you, and it feels like you didn't even think about including me." "Honey, that's not fair," she said quickly. "We appreciated everything you did. We thought you'd want us to enjoy it, and it's been a long time since your sister had time with us like this." Her words hit me like a slap. It wasn't just the trip, it was what it represented. They had chosen her, prioritizing her presence over mine, as if I were just an afterthought in their family dynamic. I could feel my anger rising, but I didn't want to explode, not yet. "I need to go," I said abruptly. "Enjoy the rest of your trip." Before she could respond, I hung up, my heart pounding. I tossed my phone onto the coffee table and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The conversation hadn't given me any clarity, only more questions. Why had they chosen her? What did I miss that made them think this was okay? And why did it feel like this wasn't the first time I'd been pushed aside? The night stretched on, and my thoughts kept circling back to moments from the past. Little things I had brushed off or ignored started to resurface, my sister being the center of attention at family gatherings, my parents showering her with praise while my efforts were met with polite nods. I had always chalked it up to her being the youngest, the one who needed the most encouragement. But now, it felt like something more. As the hours passed, my anger began to cool, replaced by a hollow ache. I wasn't just upset about the trip, I felt betrayed, like an outsider in my own family. And for the first time, I wondered if I'd ever truly been part of the picture at all. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, memories played out like a slideshow in my mind. Birthday parties where my sister blew out the candles on my cake because she was too little to understand. Family trips where her preferences dictated the itinerary. Even holidays, where her needs always seemed to outweigh my own. I hadn't let it bother me then, chalking it up to the natural dynamics of having a younger sibling. But now, in the cold silence of my apartment, those moments felt heavier, like the pieces of a puzzle I had been too blind to see. The next morning, I woke up feeling drained. My mind was a fog of resentment and doubt. Normally, I'd call one of my parents or my sister for advice when I felt like this, but now, they were the problem. Instead, I decided to keep myself busy. I cleaned the apartment from top to bottom, trying to scrub away the bitterness clawing at my chest. By the time I finished, it was late afternoon. I sat down on the couch, staring at my phone on the table. My sister's Instagram was still open, the smiling faces of my parents staring back at me. I hesitated, then opened our family group chat. It had been silent for days, no updates, no explanations, nothing. I decided to break the silence. Hey. Hope you're all having a great time. Just wondering, was there a reason I wasn't invited on this trip? I hit send before I could second-guess myself, the words hanging there like a challenge. I put the phone down and tried to distract myself, but every second that passed felt heavier than the last. When my phone buzzed 15 minutes later, I grabbed it quickly. It was my sister who replied. It's not like that. You're overthinking this. That was it. No apology, no explanation. Just a single dismissive line, as if my feelings were an inconvenience. I stared at the message, my frustration mounting. I didn't respond, but I couldn't stop thinking about how quickly she brushed it off, like I was the one creating a problem. By evening, I gave up on trying to make sense of it on my own. I called my best friend, Kyle, someone who had known me long enough to understand the dynamics of my family. They left you out of the trip you planned for them? Kyle said, his disbelief evident even through the phone. That's messed up. Yeah, I muttered. And when I asked about it, they acted like I was the one making a big deal out of nothing. Kyle sighed. I hate to say it, but are you really surprised? You've told me before how they treat your sister like she's the center of the universe. Maybe this is just another example of that. His words stung, not because they were wrong, but because I'd spent so much time convincing myself that those patterns weren't real. So what do I do? I asked. Honestly? You need to talk to them. Not a quick text or a half-hearted call. Sit them down and make them listen. If they don't see how much this hurt you, nothing's ever going to change. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Kyle's advice was solid, but the idea of confronting them directly filled me with dread. Still, I couldn't let this simmer forever. If I wanted answers, I'd have to demand them. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, trying to find the courage to face the ghosts of my past. The truth was, this wasn't just about the trip anymore. It was about years of feeling overlooked, ignored, and forgotten. And I wasn't going to let it continue. The next morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. After hours of deliberation, I decided I couldn't let this slide. If I didn't say something now, the resentment would fester and grow, and I'd never look at my family the same way again. I paced the living room, rehearsing what I'd say. I wanted to be calm and rational, but the emotions swirling inside me threatened to spill over. Finally, I took a deep breath, grabbed my phone, and called my dad. He answered on the second ring. Hey, kiddo, he said, his voice relaxed. The familiar tone hit me like a wave, a reminder of how much I loved him, despite how hurt I felt. Hey, Dad, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Got a minute? Of course. What's up? I hesitated for a second, then dove in. I saw the pictures from the trip. It looks amazing. It is, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Your mom and I were just saying how grateful we are to you for setting it all up. The words were kind, but they felt hollow. I pressed on. So, why wasn't I invited? There was a pause, and I could hear the sound of waves and faint chatter in the background. When he finally spoke, his voice was cautious. We didn't mean to hurt you. We just thought, well, your sister's been going through a tough time lately, and we thought she needed this more than you did. My jaw tightened. A tough time? What does that have to do with leaving me out of something I planned? It's not about leaving you out, he said quickly. It's just, you've always been so independent. You don't need us in the same way she does. The words hit me harder than I expected. So because I don't need you, I get sidelined. Do you know how that makes me feel? Of course we care about you, he said, his tone defensive now. But we can't always juggle everything perfectly. We thought this would be good for her. And what about me? I asked, my voice shaking despite my efforts to stay calm. I spent weeks planning this for you, and it feels like none of that mattered. You didn't even tell me you were going. I had to find out from social media. He sighed heavily, the weight of the conversation settling between us. I'm sorry, kiddo. Maybe we didn't think it through. But you're stronger than you realize. You don't need us to validate you. His words were meant to console, but they only deepened the ache in my chest. Maybe I don't, I said quietly. But it would have been nice to feel like I mattered to you, just this once. There was a long silence before he finally said, I'll talk to your mom and your sister when we get back. Maybe we owe you a proper apology. Maybe, I echoed, my voice hollow. Enjoy the rest of your trip, Dad. Take care, kiddo, he said, his voice soft. I hung up and set the phone down, my hands trembling. The conversation had given me part of the answer I was looking for, but it hadn't brought the closure I hoped for. Instead, it left me with a deeper question, was I always going to be the one who didn't need them enough to be a priority? For the rest of the week, I carried the weight of that call like a stone in my chest. My dad's words played on a loop in my head, you don't need us in the same way she does. Was that really what they thought of me? That because I wasn't constantly leaning on them, I didn't deserve the same consideration. It was a cruel paradox, my independence, the thing I thought they admired, was now the reason I felt invisible to them. I kept replaying the trip in my mind, imagining them laughing together, enjoying the sunsets, the dinners, the excursions. And all the while, I was here, staring at photos and videos of a vacation that should have been ours, not theirs. I didn't hear from them again until the night they got back. My sister called me, her tone breezy and cheerful, as if nothing was wrong. Hey, big bro, she said. We just got home, and you'll be happy to know the trip was a huge success. Mom and Dad are so relaxed now. You seriously nailed it with that resort. Glad you all enjoyed yourselves, I said flatly, not bothering to hide my bitterness. She hesitated, sensing the edge in my voice. Look, she said, her tone shifting, I know you're upset, but this wasn't personal. I didn't mean for you to feel left out. Didn't mean for me to feel left out. I repeated, my voice rising. You didn't even think to include me. The trip wasn't for you, it was for them. I planned it for them. And then you just inserted yourself, like it was your right. Come on, don't be dramatic, she said, brushing me off. You're making this a bigger deal than it is. The casual dismissal snapped something in me. You think I'm overreacting? You think it's nothing to watch my family take a trip I planned and then pretend like I didn't exist the whole time? Do you know how humiliating that feels? Okay, fine, she said, her tone defensive now. Maybe we should have handled it differently, but Mom and Dad just thought it made sense for me to come. I've been dealing with a lot lately, and they wanted me there. And what have you been dealing with, exactly? I demanded. What makes your problems so important that they decided I didn't matter? She hesitated, and for a second, I thought she might finally tell me. But instead, she said, "It's complicated, okay? You wouldn't understand. That's your excuse." I said, my anger boiling over. "You act like the world revolves around you, and mom and dad let you because it's easier for them to keep you happy than to consider anyone else. That's not fair," she shot back. "I didn't force them to invite me. They wanted me there." "Of course they did," I said, my voice laced with bitterness. "Because you've always been their priority. And I'm just the backup plan. The one who doesn't need them, so they don't have to bother." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, she said, "I don't know what you want me to say. I'm sorry you feel that way, but it's not my fault." I laughed bitterly. "No, it's not your fault. It's mine, for thinking I was part of this family in the same way you are." Before she could respond, I hung up. My hands were shaking as I set the phone down, my chest heaving with the effort to contain everything I was feeling. The next day, my mom called. I let it go to voicemail. My dad texted later in the evening, asking if we could talk. I ignored him too. For the first time in my life, I didn't want to hear their excuses or apologies. I wanted them to sit with the same silence I had felt while they were off making memories without me. That night, as I lay in bed, the anger began to give way to something heavier. I thought about the years I'd spent bending over backward to show my parents I cared. Every time I stepped in to help with something my sister couldn't manage. Every sacrifice I'd made without complaint. And for what? To be left out of the one thing I had done purely out of love. I realized then that the trip was just the surface of something much deeper. It wasn't about a vacation. It was about how I had always been the one to give without asking for anything in return, and how they had taken that for granted. The thought was like a fissure breaking open in the foundation of my life. For years, I had ignored the cracks, convincing myself they didn't matter. But now, I couldn't unsee them. I decided that when I did talk to them, it wouldn't be a conversation about a single trip. It would be about everything. Every slight, every overlooked moment, every time I had been made to feel like I was on the outside looking in. And for the first time, I wouldn't let them brush it off. A few days passed before I finally agreed to meet them. My dad called, sounding earnest, almost pleading. "We need to talk," he said. "All of us. Face to face." I agreed, but I wasn't sure what I expected. Part of me wanted an apology, while another part wanted answers to questions I had been carrying for years. We met at their house, the same home where I'd grown up, but it felt unfamiliar that day. My mom and dad sat on the couch, their post-vacation tans a sharp contrast to the tension in the room. My sister was there too, sitting cross-legged in the armchair she always claimed as hers. "Thanks for coming," my mom said softly, breaking the silence. I sat across from them, my arms crossed. "So, let's talk," I said. "I've been waiting." My dad exchanged a glance with my mom, then leaned forward. "First, we're sorry," he said. "We didn't mean to hurt you. We should have told you what was happening instead of letting you find out the way you did." I nodded, but the apology felt incomplete. "Why did you do it? Why didn't you invite me? Just be honest." For a moment, no one spoke. My mom twisted her hands nervously, while my dad stared at the floor. Finally, my sister sighed and said, "Because of me." I looked at her, waiting for her to continue. She hesitated, then said, "I've been going through some stuff I didn't want to talk about at first. And Mom and Dad thought the trip might help." "What kind of stuff?" I asked, my voice sharp. She winced, and for the first time, she looked less defiant and more vulnerable. "I've been struggling," she said quietly. "With my job, with life in general. I made some bad decisions, and things kind of fell apart." Mom and Dad have been trying to help me get back on my feet. I stared at her, the words sinking in. So, what? You needed a vacation to fix everything? It wasn't like that, my mom interjected, her voice pleading. We just thought some time together would help her reset. You've always been so strong, so independent. We didn't think you'd feel left out. There it was again, strong and independent. The words that had been used to justify my exclusion. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. Do you realize how that sounds? Like I don't matter because I don't need saving? No, that's not what we meant, my dad said quickly. We didn't think. That's the problem, I said, my voice rising despite myself. You didn't think. Not about me. Not about how it would feel to see you all enjoying something I gave you without me. My sister looked at me then, guilt etched across her face. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I should have said something. I knew it wasn't fair, but I didn't want to lose the chance to. I don't know, feel like part of the family again. Her words stung, but not in the way I expected. They reminded me of how I had been feeling all along, like I wasn't really part of the family. I get it, I said after a long pause. You needed them. But so did I. The room fell silent, my words hanging heavy in the air. My mom wiped at her eyes, while my dad stared at his hands. Finally, my mom said, You're right. We should have thought about you, about what this trip would mean to you. We made a mistake, and we're sorry. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was a start. I don't just want an apology, I said, my voice firm. I need things to change. I can't keep being the one who's always expected to understand, to sacrifice, to step aside. We'll do better, my dad said, his voice steady. You deserve that. For the first time, I believed him. We talked for a while longer, untangling years of misunderstandings and unspoken feelings. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't all resolved in that one conversation. But as I left that day, I felt lighter, like the cracks in our foundation could finally start to heal. It would take time, but at least now, I wasn't carrying the weight of it alone.